Comic Boom.
Hi guys, Comic Boom here to talk about the DC Nation panel and the latest DC news, at least coming out of the New York City Comic Con that I was happy to attend. First time in New York. I want to discuss the DC timeline. Now, the DC timeline, the Coles Notes version of my opinion, quite simply, is that it's a good idea. It's a good idea that we have a DC timeline, because let's face it, it's always a good idea in any comic book universe to know what the hell's going on, to know that editorially at least, people have some sense as to what the history is of the various characters and storylines, and exactly knowing what stories took place and when. So the idea of a timeline for the DC universe, it's a good one, but let's be blunt here. It's always been a good idea. Having a timeline is just another way of saying we want to get organized. We want to get our, we want to get it together. And so I think that's a good idea. My concern is that editorially, their failure has never been with that idea. The failure has always been editorially, at the editorial level for DC. Look, DC tried with Rebirth to restructure things. They tried with Crisis on Infinite Earths to restructure and organize things, and that even worked for 25, 30 years, but they decided to change that up. Flashpoint was a disastrous idea. It led into the New 52. The New 52 was a disastrous idea. But it at least, I guess, boosted the industry a little bit. But what Dan Didio even admitted at the DC Nation panel, which wasn't much of an admission, it's frankly something he's been, he's denied from time to time. Is that, I'm going to back up a bit. The New 52 and the New 50, leading up to the years leading up to the New 52, Dan Didio, when he first became editor-in-chief, he began to talk almost immediately about the importance of story over continuity, that the story should matter more than whether or not the stories necessarily fit into a particular timeline. He all but basically said that. And those of us who are comic book lovers, I get where that's coming from. Certainly you want to focus on the great stories. I mean, some of the best stories of all time for DC, like even Frank Miller's Batman, that was technically out of continuity. And there's a lot of, you don't want to necessarily be beholden to continuity. If you have a really good story to tell, there ought to be a mechanism by which you can tell that story without it necessarily being radically changed to its detriment, simply to try to fit into an existing continuity or existing timeline. Nonetheless, I've never considered it to be rocket science to create a timeline, or for DC to just very, very frankly, just have your editors have discussions with writers. Some of the best stories that have ever been written for DC Comics, in my view, looking back in hindsight, with some minor tweaks they could have at the time, fit in better with the existing continuity at the time without compromising the integrity of the story. But hey, that's not how it is. We're always going to have tensions between a writer wanting to pursue his or her vision without having to be hindered by continuity. And I get that. So, we finally get this timeline. It's quite clear that Marvel's approach, which has always been to have one continuous timeline, has really, really paid off for Marvel. That's one thing that DC has been. Marvel has absolutely won the argument on that. DC basically revamped, rebooted, choose whichever word you want to use, revamped, rebooted, rebirthed, whatever, regurgitated, enough times that even now we don't even know how many crises there's been. According to Bendis, who's not an expert on anything DC at all, he claimed there were 7 crises in his storyline for Young Justice. How many crises have there been in the DC universe? It's been nuts. It's been a disaster, quite frankly. But it's had its moments, but it's been confusing. So now we get this timeline. Now we have, what exactly is this DC timeline? Well, so far, all that we can tell is we're going to have 5 generations of DC timeline. There was 4 generations of timeline that were identified in the DC Nations panel. Dan Didio flashed on the screen. When we were all in the room, he flashed on the screen. People from all over, comic book comic book culture were in New York in the DC Nations panel. I was fortunate enough to be there. But they didn't leave the timeline up on the screen long enough for us to really get a good look at it. I know Bleeding Cool put some snapshots on their website trying to figure out what was said and what was where and what heroes existed and what timeline. Bottom line is this. Here's the Coles Notes version. There's a couple of new revelations here. DC is trying to basically capture the best of all possible worlds. So the first superhero is going to be Wonder Woman, and they took their inspiration from the movie. So Wonder Woman in World War I, she's going to technically be the first superhero in the DC universe. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And then that's slowly going to lead into the Justice Society, and that's going to be the first generation of heroes. The next hero that makes it onto the scene is Superman. And then Batman's going to come on the scene. And this is where things get a little interesting. We go through various timelines. The first generation timeline, the second generation timeline, the third generation, the fourth generation. And apparently Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman are going to be aging through all of this. Wonder Woman, I believe, just remains immortal. At least, this is unclear. I'm assuming Wonder Woman is immortal, or at the very least, ages very slow. Superman, of course, is Kryptonian. He's going to age slow, but apparently, when we get into the fourth and fifth generations, Superman and Batman are going to be in their 60s and 70s, and it's going to be DC's way of exploring later generation legacy characters in different storylines. So I think that DC's theory is, and we'll see how well this works out, is they're going to be able. This is what's going to happen. Any writer that comes to them with a good story or a story, they're going to look at that story and say, okay, well, in what generation is that story best told in? If it's a classic Superman story, they'll just say it's a story in the first generation or second generation. If that is a story in the 60s or 80s or 90s or whatever, well, they'll place it in the third or fourth generation of stories. The modern day, the present day type of stories of the New Young Justice, as an example, I'm guessing, or the Legion of Superheroes, are probably going to be the fifth generation of heroes, whatever the case might be. So I think that's the plan, is that they're going to incorporate hyper time into this scenario, so that, quite frankly, it's impossible to logically include the different incarnations of Superboy, Superman, etc., in all these generations. So how are they going to do that? Well, they want to make sure that all the stories that have happened, so they're going to incorporate hyper time. Now, basically, hyper time is a concept that basically says, look, not only are there alternate universes out there, but there's literally alternate timelines within the alternate multiverses, so that if we zigged in this timeline, there's another timeline in hyper time where we zagged. So we zigged here, we zagged there. So it's like a multitude of what if stories. Different things happen differently in other timelines. That's hyper time. In fact, right now in the pages of Justice League, Brainiac is capturing certain timelines in bottles, where he used to capture Bottled City, and Brainiac is of course known for capturing the Bottled City of Kandor. He, of course, now is capturing various timelines in hypertime and utilizing the heroes and villains of those timelines to the advantage of Doom in the Justice Doom War. But I digress somewhat. My point being is that with hypertime, DC can pretty much do whatever. Here's what my fear is, and here is what I expect is going to happen. I can only base the future on past conduct. My concern is, and I've stated this before, you can't solve a problem with the same component parts that make up the problem in the first place. The problem since DC Rebirth, DC Metal, and leading into is that we've had the same editorial teams. And this editorial team, unfortunately, they just don't get it. They're not very good at structuring and organizing. And really all this is I really don't see how creating 5 generations of a timeline and now making it, actually, it sounds a little bit more complicated. I don't know, this is going to sound so paradoxical, guys, but I never really was that confused by DC's timeline. I don't find it that confusing. I mean, really, you can dumb the DC universe down by simply saying that there was an original crisis on Earths, and from that, we had a couple of crises, they resolved itself, and we've we have 52 Earths now in the multiverse. And we can sort of leave it at that. And we can say there was a Flashpoint hiccup, and now we're correcting itself. There was a minor hiccup after Flashpoint, and now we're back because of the events of Doomsday Clock, and it's all good. That's not that complicated. Not really. I just summarized it. You know, now the devil's, of course, always in the details. And I fear that DC is a little bit too concerned about the details, and they're creating a lot of devils to try to deal with it. I mean, look at Marvel. Marvel has one continuous timeline, and their timeline is a mess. Marvel's timeline doesn't make a lot of sense. Look at Spider-Man One More Day. I mean, God, there's all kinds of things in the Marvel continuous timeline that don't make a lot of sense. But they just force it. They say, no, it's one timeline. And people accept it and they move on. DC has never been able to get comfortable with just pick a timeline and relax. We don't need another crisis, for Christ's sake. Anyways, but it is what it is. So now we got these 5 generations. Do I think it's workable? Sure, I guess I think it's workable. I just don't have a lot of faith in the creative editorial teams around to pull it off. The only writer right now for DC that even has a slight inkling as to DC history is, well, Jeff Johns, but Jeff Johns isn't really involved anymore. Doomsday Clock's fantastic. Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV, I like what they're doing with Justice League. There's a lot of homage and respect by Snyder and Tynion IV in their Justice League writings and Justice League Dark. They seem to have a connection, at least some kind of tacit connection to DC's past, that I can feel them honoring it in the Justice League story with the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, the Justice Doom War. There are elements there that give me a nostalgic feeling of my youth. And so I like that aspect of it. But really, all the other writers at DC right now, I don't mind, you know, as storytellers, they are what they are. I mean, but Tom King doesn't have a clue about continuity, and he doesn't care, and DC doesn't care. They want him to write and do his thing. Clearly, his Batman is whether you like it or hate it, the fact of the matter is that it's a nightmare of continuity. He doesn't respect continuity. He has no clue what's going on in the other titles. That's obvious. They don't communicate. They say they do, they don't. Bendis clearly doesn't have a clue what's going on in the other titles. It's obvious. It's clear. It's obvious. He doesn't have a clue. They give lip service, say they talk to each other. They don't talk to each other. Why? Look at the evidence. What's the evidence? The comic books. Read the comic book stories. There's no connection there. And, you know, throwing lipstick on the pig after the fact, you know, you're still left with a pig with lipstick on it. You know what I'm saying? But in any event, we're creating now a 5th generation of heroes. So this is how DC is going to justify this continuity mess, which is really what it is right now. So with all the stuff that we've been complaining about with Bendis, with the horrific writing on Superman, on Millennium, leading into Legion of Superheroes, the decompression nightmare, and doing off his own thing, going off on tangents and all that jazz, that's all explained by, that's just 5th generation stuff. So really all this is an excuse to ignore existing continuity. That's really what it is. It's not an excuse to respect it. That's what kind of concerns me. And even though you can justify it, I feel like this is it's really a PR. It's like Dan Didio was playing a politician up there on the DC Nation stage. You're playing a politician, you know, basically just creating 5 generation of heroes, plopping everything down while these comic books from this era go in this generation, this from this generation, and then trying to make it all make sense. Look, right on the surface level, it seems like I don't know really what to make of it. I'm hopeful, but I got to tell you, man, it really feels like they're throwing they threw 5 apples at the wall and they all exploded, and now they got to make apple pie. And if that doesn't make sense, that analogy, that's kind of how I feel about 5 generations of DC heroes. But, you know, we shall see. Guys, I've put my foot in my mouth many times. I've admitted when I am wrong, and I want to admit that I'm wrong, and my skepticism is not appropriate. I really want to be wrong on this. I really hope that at some point DC, at the end of the Justice Doom War, at the end of Doomsday Clock, we're supposed to be getting a crisis next year that's leading into a hyper-time crisis that will ultimately lead into the advent of this 4th and 5th generation of heroes and have this massive explanation that will supposedly simplify everything. Wow. that is something that would be really curious to see. I have to admit, I kind of like the idea. I'm 50 years old, so I'm biased because I'm 50. So I wouldn't mind reading the adventures of a 50-year-old Superman, But at the same time, I don't want the younger generations to be deprived of a young, vibrant Superman as opposed to an older guy like me. Not that I'm Superman, but you know what I'm saying. We all want comic books to be written for us because we're all selfish bastards, right? And the idea of 5 generations is good as long as you want to cater to as many comic book fans as you possibly can, and of course the youth and the young are what keep comic books fresh and alive and vibrant, and not old conservative jerks like myself. So I want the best of all worlds, and hopefully that's what the 5 generations of DC, that the DC timeline will bring. And yeah, just this thing here. There was Batman. There was a Year of the Villain, and there was this great. Wrong way here. There we go. There was a great giveaways by DC there at the con. It was really great. Really liked that. There's actually a plastic cover that it folds. This is the back and this is the front. And when you fold the plastic above the heroes, you can see which heroes are the infected. So it's quite good. And so I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed picking that up. And then, of course, there was the Harley Quinn. There's a huge promotion for the Harley Quinn, the Birds of Prey movie. And then I picked up the foil cover to Millennium #2. I won't show that because I'm not a fan of Millennium. It's actually, I'm not a big fan of it. Harley Quinn. I want to talk a quick moment about the Harley Quinn preview for a second, because it was at the New York Comic Con. Margot Robbie and the cast of Birds of Prey, they showed up, and they were hard to see. In fact, I just got a glimpse of them. They were so hard to see that I never even got a picture of them. I think maybe you could see them between the crowds when I try to take pictures, but I'm a short guy and I couldn't get above everyone else, and everyone is holding up their phones trying to get a picture of Margot Robbie as she's signing autographs and doing the posing, and I have to say that I really hope I didn't get a great feeling out of the Birds of Prey movie. I don't like the title. I don't like the fact that the Huntress is in it. Black Canary shouldn't be in it. Cassandra Cain shouldn't be in it. It should be Harley Quinn. It should be Poison Ivy. I got to straight up say that right out of the gate, right off the bat, this movie is wrong-headed. I don't mind Black Mask as the villain. What is it? Was it Connor What's the actor's name who plays Black Mask? Unimportant. Not impressed with him either. So far, the preview left much to be desired. There was no fight sequences, no action. The action was terrible. Maybe I realize it's just a preview, but I got to tell you, I really didn't like it. I hate the costumes. And by the way, we saw the costumes at New York Comic Con. They actually had Harley Quinn's costume. They actually had the wardrobes of the characters, what they wore, in display cases. And maybe I'll show some up in post-edit here in this video. Awful. Terrible. The wardrobes are just awful. Very little thought went into the Harley Quinn's wardrobe for this movie. I think it's terrible. I don't know where they got those ideas from. And I know some of you might say, well, no, they got them from the Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda comic book. And yeah, I believe that this outfit that she wears here, I don't like it. It looks stupid. It's not Harley Quinn. It's not classic Harley. You gotta stick more to the source material, at least a little bit, in terms of design and what have you. The title itself, Emancipation of Harley Quinn, very clearly is about separating Harley Quinn from the Joker. Remember, it depends on what incarnation of Harley Quinn that you're really attached to. Harley Quinn she's different things to different people. So I can understand them wanting to emancipate her from her affiliation and intimate relationship with the Joker, who's of course psychotic. But my particular interpretation of Harley Quinn that I like is, and the movie is, I think, not doing enough of it, is, to me, the most interesting and adult take on Harley Quinn, if they're going to do a more adult take, which I don't know if this movie is we can't, in my view, it's important to remember that if you're going to do an adult take on Harley Quinn, you can't forget that this is a psychotic woman. This is a woman that wasn't manipulated by the Joker any more than she manipulated the Joker herself. She chose to be the girlfriend of the Joker. This nonsense that somehow she's a victim. that a victim of the Joker. Well, look, was she abused by the Joker? Well, I'm sure she was. She also did her share of abusing. She's also a murderer. People seem to forget this. She's a murderer, and she's a bitch, and she's a sex symbol. And for her male audience, any red-blooded male will happily fantasize about a psychotic female. Guys do it all the time. You just don't want to marry them. But you know what I'm saying? She's a sex symbol. She is a psychotic female villain. She kills. She's a murderer. At best, she's an anti-hero. Emancipating her from the Joker is not going to make her automatically into an anti-hero. It's just going to make her into a psychotic female who doesn't have the Joker as a boyfriend anymore. That to me is, frankly, maybe a more interesting take on it is, remember that this woman ultimately is somebody who's got very serious psychological issues herself, and that's part of her charm. It's a psychotic charm. I don't need to like Harley Quinn to love the movie. I don't even know if I want to like Harley Quinn. Do I want to be attracted to her on a sexual level because she brings that sort of a sexual, crazy, psychotic nature to the role? Absolutely. Why not? That's Harley Quinn. But guess what? On the flip side of that, we got Harley Quinn as DC superhero girls. There's little girls in pajamas, buying Harley Quinn pajamas and watching the Harley Quinn cartoon now that's coming out. And you got they had pins now of the Harley Quinn cartoon and everything. And so they got to be careful with the movie. They have to emancipate her and make her good, right? She's probably more of a vigilante now. So we're clearly moving away from this idea, which unfortunately, in my view, we're moving away from a portrayal of Harley Quinn, which was in fact when she was the most interesting. She's now moving toward the mainstream, which is exactly why she's going to be less interesting of a character. That's what I think, and I think that's what this movie is going to show. And this movie, I predict, is going to be very, very, very disappointing. And what bothers me so much about it, and again, I hope I'm wrong, but what bothers me so much about it is what a horrible portrayal of Cassandra Cain. I mean, what a disastrous portrayal of Cassandra Cain. The Huntress, Black Canary, in the previews, there was a cool scene with Black Canary where, when she screams really loud and she makes water move. Wow. So she'll have her canary cry. But having Harley Quinn in any way, shape, or form leading the Birds of Prey, it's a deviation from DC's source material and a capitulation to nonsense, as far as I'm concerned. It's really disappointing. We should have Oracle in there. We shouldn't. This should be called a Harley Quinn movie. It should not be called Birds of Prey. Call it Ravens. Call it whatever. Don't call it Birds of Prey. That was a mistake. I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it. I predict disaster for the movie Birds of Prey, and if I am wrong, once again, I will say if I love the movie, great, and I'll say I'm wrong, but I got to tell you, it does not bode well. It didn't. The movie itself, cinematography-wise, the way it was filmed, the way it looked, her voice, the characters seemed so predictable, out of sync, it just seemed wrong on multiple levels. And of course, I'm sorry, but you better have the Joker in the movie. If you don't have the Joker in the movie and it's an emancipation movie, if I'm moving away from the Joker, I'm sorry. And I got to tell you right now, if this is a woke movie in any way, shape, or form, or some nonsense like that, it's going to suck even more. And because that's not what Harley Quinn is, not a role model. If you in any way, shape, or form are doing a movie about Harley Quinn and expect to her be a role model to anybody other than other psychopaths, you've missed the point of the character. That's what I think. But hey, I get there's different incarnations of Harley, but role model is the most ridiculous one I can think of. Anyways, I'll let it go at that. Guys, tell me what you think about DC's timeline. Tell me what you think of the Birds of Prey movie. And until next time, Comic Boom out.